All right. Hi, Dr. Nick. How are you? Hey,
Good.
I'd
How
like
are
to
you
know
doing?
also if anybody's around. I don't know if anybody is around. I don't know if anyone's going to join. It's kind of weird because I changed my quarantine calisthenics rhythm. You know, I was doing it every day, and I had
Yeah,
to pull back because I'm falling back on other things, and so I changed to
yeah,
three
for
days a
sure.
week. But the rhythm is just like all broken up. So I feel like the consistent crew from that is kind of like we're all just like, all right, quarantine's kind of bending, you know. So I don't know
Well,
who's around for stuff anymore. But
it is ending in LA, huh?
huh?
So it is ending in LA, huh? People are just fucking doing whatever now.
They're doing whatever. I mean, like, okay, so hello everyone. This is Good Bit Brain as usual. And I'll just say up front, I'll probably say this in an intro when I do the little podcast this week. But last week Dr. Nick and I were talking about. Oh, hey Terry, what's up? Welcome, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Last week, Dr. Nick and I were talking about I've talked about it for a long time. I don't think you can talk about the mental health or whatever without talking about the material realities of the world and social issues and whatever. And we kept texting about it, and I was like, maybe we'll just change the name of the pod to like Social Workers Party and just get like expressively, like explicitly political all the time. So we'll probably continue that trend. I just think I think it's, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say like idle to like stick your head in the sand and be worried about like to only talk about like self-care in the sense of like with no effect, with no, I don't know, the biggest thing
Yeah.
I'm talking to you more consistently, I said this last week, the biggest thing talking to you, Dr. Nick, more consistently and having somebody who, I don't know, I feel like you described me once like social work is like psychology applied to the real world, dealing with systems and dealing with a real positive effect, like positive, not good, you know what I mean, like effective, you know,
Yeah.
techniques and methods, dealing with an actual system of public funding, and how does that happen? Like, how do you not just like the opposite of somebody you pay 160 or 200 or $300 an hour to listen to your dreams on a couch, and they're like, I think it means this about your mom. Like the opposite of the idea of what psychology is, and I think talking to you about that and this sort of material approach to saying like, what are your values? What kind of person do you want to be? And then are you figuring out steps to make yourself more that person from a mental health standpoint? Then kind of carries out into everything. And I just think any sort of like, I don't know. I think there's truth to limit your exposure if it's becoming too much. If it's making you ineffective, then yeah, stop. Turn the news off for a little bit. Figure out like collect yourself. But the answer isn't, and then you're fine. Whoa, you turned it off and the problem's gone. Just don't. Just keep doing that. That's not a solution. And so that's never going to be our solution here. And so in that being said, in these times, yes, we're going to be much more explicitly just talking about political stuff more often and things like that. So I don't want to like. Uh, uh, I just don't want anybody unprepared for that. This isn't going to be like typical. Not that if you're around, you already know that. So anyway, I don't know what I'm saying that for, because we're gonna keep being my good bad brain probably for the foreseeable future. I was like, I don't know, but I don't know. We're just talking about it, and this is gonna be more the content often. That being said, this past week, I did have a long talk yesterday with Allie and with my brother, and just about like things I was going through, and I kind of realized that like we were talking about the notion of this thing they say, better to be a gardener or better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. This idea of like, which is interesting because I've always attached it with martial arts and stuff in the past. I kind of make fun of self-defensey type people who are like hardcore reality-based quote unquote self-defense people, because I'm like, you're living with a terrorist every day. Like you're, this sort of, you're bringing a
Yeah.
thing into your life that's imaginary. I think it's the way I'm feeling about it is that, I know this is long winded, but I'm just, bear with me. That like the now some of that isn't imaginary. Like there is some reason that preparing yourself for like negative things out there and negative people might not be crazy. It might not be like imaginary, and it might actually be like healthy for you in the long term to do things like that. But also, I realized the way I was dealing with the anxiety and stress of how awful people are and things are, and how, like, ungrounded society's feeling, and things that our government's doing and things like that, response for, like, reactionary responses that are so unexpected, just, defending violence and stuff. Maybe a way I was dealing with the stress was by diving way too far in and too hyper focusing, and, like, only making my life about this thing for, and like steps I can take to feel like I had a handle on it. And I, like, had this moment where I was like, oh, I'm deep in I don't know if anxiety response is correct, or, something that on the surface was looking like, I'm fine. I'm fine. And then we talked about it a little bit, and I start, like, tearing up, like, immediately. And I'm like, I'm very worried. I'm very afraid for everybody. And I'm scared. You know what I mean? And I'm like, oh, I really am. And so I was like, I think it's important to be honest with myself about, like, moderating that intensity, understanding it's a long game thing. And then also I'll say, like, just in some of the, like, preparations, and, like, I think this idea of, like, boys and doomsday prepping stuff is, like, especially me and my stuff that I'm into, and when I, like, it feels like it's gonna be fun. It's like a fun, silly, fun hobby. But, like, as I was, like, doing some supply stuff with my brother, I was just like, this is dark. I don't like that this is happening. Allie, I thought it would feel much better having my lovely, liberal, smart girlfriend tell me, wow, you were right about, like, certain things that I was worried about in society, or fascist Trump or whatever. You'd think it would feel better to be right, but it just feels dark and scary, and I don't like it. I don't like thinking about the realities of the systemic, like, violence that exists, and that when that truth is being spoken to these powerful units, that their response is to lock down and get more reactionary and more violent and defend it, and that just doesn't bode well for where things will go. And it just all felt very dark and scary. It's not fun,
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know. So I thought maybe we could talk a little about that same old thing about, like, what's the appropriate level of sort of, like, self-care-ish kind of stuff, but then also you specifically I feel good talking to, because you've worked with veterans a lot, and you're also, like, I know your mindset around the things you do, and martial arts and like Buddhism's kind of stuff. I guess I was about that notion of being a warrior in a garden kind of thing. Like, this morning I was talking about that with Allie again, and with my brother, this idea of it, and she said, doesn't that kind of, like, glorify violence though in a way that's weird? And I was like, here's what I thought about it. And this is what I said, I was like, two things. One, I truly, genuinely feel a lifetime of doing martial arts that gave me some both competency with violence and more, like, comfort around it, but also an intense awareness of the consequences of it, that you don't know what anyone can do to you, and you do know what you can do to some people, and it just is not worth anything. That when you are in these moments of conflict, you're a lot less inclined to accelerate, because you're not unused to the discomfort, and so, like, you just never get in fights. You just know how to de-escalate because you, like, take it seriously. That's one. And then two, the other side of it, for people who aren't inclined to, like, answer fight or flight with fight, that's what I'm saying is, like, it both, I think, being aware of violence first makes you less inclined to obey the fight instinct of fight, flight, freeze. But then also, if you're somebody who's more inclined to flee or freeze, or freeze rather, really. Flee, hopefully. Flee is fine. Just get the fuck out of there. But if you freeze, that also, I think, especially if you're in a marginalized group of people, or somebody who's, like, often subject to oppression by the majority cis white male class, is, like, teaching you that you are worth fighting for is, like, a valuable lesson to feel a sense of protectiveness around yourself. People will have it for other people easily, but I was like, that has value, and that, like, yes, like, cis white straight men don't probably need to learn as a class that I'm worth fighting for, but a lot of other people do. I think women do. I think minority people some times do. It just, do you know what I'm saying? Like that there are values. So those are the two thoughts. I was interested in talking about this idea of a warrior in a garden and not letting it get away from you, where like now you are glorifying violence or you're just becoming obsessed with this dark concept. But how like it can help prepare you. And then I have another question later, but I'll bring that up later.
I mean, I think so. These are, timely and interesting topics. I would say a couple of things. I think one is we as a culture are obsessed with violence.
Yeah.
I personally am very interested in violence. I think, kind of normative expression of violence, the way violence is kind of understood in society, the way that we kind of get really incoherent mixed messages about violence in our society. I think that kind of incoherent mixed messaging is a smokescreen for what is just in reality an American obsession with violence. I mean,
is it?
I don't.
Certainly American, but do you think it's just American? Like that's not.
Look, violence is it's squarely in the repertoire of normal human behavior. I mean, it's not as if violence is an aberrant phenomenon. It isn't. I mean, it's just empirically wrong to make a claim that somehow violence is aberrant. It's not. I mean, we have like a social contract, and within the rules of that social contract, we normalize and excuse some types of violence, and other types are not normal, and all that stuff is like secondary. I mean, the primary drive to protect yourself and exert your will against a resisting other by forcing them, which is violence, that's just that's mammal behavior.
Right.
So it's simply part of our repertoire behavior, and we try to control that with our social rules govern behavior. That's, put it any more simply than that. So of course, like all kind of mammalian responses, there are some people who, through their own innate biology and their social learning behavior, have a real predisposition to responding with violence, and that's its own kind of complex set of circumstances. And then there are other people who are just less likely to do that because of their innate tendencies and their social learning and their environment and all this stuff. Right? So I think that's what we have to understand first of all, is that one, violence is one of the within the normal repertoire of human behavior. And two, that we do have, I think, yes, America has more of a national obsession with violence than other countries. I do think that. Just culturally. Right. I mean, look at the media that we create and export.
Right.
We have a worship of violence. I mean, we just do. So, I mean, just look at our kind of national rhetoric, and I think there are probably several academic studies you could explore that would, support this claim that I'm making. I think it's pretty clear. I mean, what is like one of the core characteristics of American international identity that we pride ourselves on? Our superior military. I mean, if you ask what like core American things are, in 3 or 4 sentences, somebody's going to talk about the military. I mean, It's just, I think that's part of it. And then to your point about like, so given that as our kind of backdrop, to your point about whether we focus too much on it, I mean, I think it's, fantasizing about violence is empowering for some people. For some people, I think fantasizing about violence to feel empowered and you feel drift and destabilized and worried, it's quite understandable, right? I mean, like, it feels like the world's going to shit. It feels like we can't trust our authority figures. It feels like there's a large group of people who just fundamentally misunderstands the reality in front of them, which is even more destabilizing. Right. And that's scary, And so what can we do to kind of make that feel less scary and take a little bit of control over the situation? Well, we can sort of prepare for and fantasize about what we would have to do if it came to, like, mass social violence. And that some people will feel empowering. For people who have like more of a comfort level with violence, it's going to feel more empowering. You know, for people who
Yes.
are terrified of violence, it's going to feel scarier.
Yeah.
I think those things are those reactions are explainable and normal within this context.
I mean,
you
I
know?
guess my thought is like how do okay, like I don't know. I feel inside myself. I feel like this strange dichotomy of I really have fun doing violent stuff and I hate hurting people. Like anytime someone gets hurt, it's mortifying. Even doing jiu-jitsu against equal people who are if you're going hard and something goes wrong, whether they slip or they tap a little late, you just feel miserable immediately. Like how come I feel that way and other people don't have that?
So this is the kind of key concept is consent. You know,
Sure.
the key concept here, I think, is consent. When you are engaged in consensual violence,
Right.
that is a different thing. That is an entirely different thing
Well,
because
certainly, but I'm
consent.
sorry,
go
I didn't mean to
ahead,
interrupt you. Please continue. Sorry.
I was going to say because it's the same with like sexual behavior. You know, you can do kind of weird, kinky shit as long as it's consensual. It's okay.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
truly consensual, not coercive. That's not real consent. I mean,
Right.
real consent. So, when we engage in like kind of behaviors that tap into our deeper kind of mammalian violent urges and they're consensual, I think people who in my mind I would call moral people can feel okay about that. That's why it's like I can enjoy watching like UFC. I don't enjoy seeing someone get like beat up in a street fight. I don't enjoy that,
Yeah.
because it's not really consensual. So I think that's also that concept of consent is so critical, and I think we can apply it at a larger level too. For example, this epidemic of police violence.
Yeah.
Like when we live in a civilized society, nobody should fucking put their hands on you without
Exactly.
your consent,
Right.
unless it's, in my view, to prevent immediate harm to someone else
Right.
that can't be avoided in any other way. Because
Exactly.
the act of putting your hands on someone and controlling their behavior without their consent is such a violation of their personhood and their humanity that to me it's the most serious thing you can do.
Yes.
So to do that without consent is unconscionable to me without an overriding directive, which is to protect other people involved in our social contract. Which is why it is so enraging when you see like this guy who was shot in Atlanta. There's no reason to put your hands on somebody who's fucking sleeping in his car.
Yeah.
There's
And
no reason.
on top of that, to shoot somebody as they run away from you when you're a police officer.
For their ego, for their pride and ego. They're so
100%.
ashamed to have had their taser stolen and afraid to be tased that they would rather murder someone, kill someone, and take their life.
As they're clearly
expose
leaving.
themselves.
As they're clearly going away, like de-escalating the
Who's going to get
situation.
tased? Who's going to get tased with his own taser? But you know what? If you are so shitty at retaining your taser and you're so scared to get tased with it that you'd rather kill somebody, you can't do that job. I mean, just point blank, you can't be effective in your job. So, but anyway, the point is, putting like police officers putting their hands on people who are not engaged in violence, such a violation of our basic human dignity that I don't believe they should ever do that. Ever. No excuse.
Yes.
Take a picture, get their fucking address, and mail them a ticket.
Yeah.
Don't put your hands on people.
Absolutely.
Aren't imminently going to hurt someone else. There's just no reason for that. So that's, so sorry for going off, but that's what I want. That's on violence. But consensual violence is fundamentally different from non-consensual violence.
Beautiful.
Fundamentally different.
Sorry, okay. Terry, who's a good old friend and longtime Good Bad Brain person, but said this in the chat, and I think because I completely agree with you on this consensual violence thing, but because I want to move, because there's another aspect of it that I kind of want to talk to you about is like figuring out how to moderate. So Terry said, not glorifying violence, it's liberating fear within the U.S. BIPOC. I hope it's okay to say it like that. Black and indigenous people of color are BIPOC. I don't know. Tell me if I'm not supposed to say BIPOC. Are forced to use violence as a tool. Drugs, crime, quote, all the bad things of America to survive. 100%. Terry Bradley continues, while white systemic privilege utilizes violence as a weapon to maintain agency. And that is true. And this is kind of like also where I'm trying to talk about, because yes, I completely agree with you obviously about the consensual thing. That's the thing I think we've discussed in here before. But there's this notion of like, when is violence appropriate? So getting outside of the psychosexual version of it, the version of just like, it's in us, we need a healthy way to put it out there because it's never appropriate in society. But I think the message of it's never appropriate in
society, I don't think it's true. I mean,
that's what I'm saying. Is like, I'm at this place where violence is dark and poisonous when it's the version of it that is about actual real, I need it. We need it to, liberate this fear. We need it to, it feels scary to face someone who really hates you or really... or face the possibility even. They talk about in this, it's so strange to me, that book On Killing, it's like was so moving to me and such like, I would say one of the most important books I read in my life, this book On Killing. It's this guy Grossman, this colonel something, lieutenant colonel in the army, wrote this book about the psychology of killing and how fucking abhorrent it is to us instinctively to do violence against other humans, especially like lethal violence. It's really powerful. They talk about how like almost every war throughout human history, based on the records they can find and then the real numbers they ran during like World War II, that they found that there's this thing called like the soldiers' like prerogative to miss, that like soldiers who attempted to shoot to kill the enemy willfully has damn Terry just goes, history has made the color of our skin the consent to violence. Damn, that's crazy. But anyway, sorry, let me finish this thought. This is going to keep coming up. Was that like it was like 15 to 20%, like less than 1 in 5 of soldiers who were trained to go fight fucking the Nazis, even in World War II. People who were like, these are bad people, whatever. Like they wouldn't try to kill the enemy. They'd pretend to shoot so they look like they're doing their job, but they just won't do it because it's so abhorrent to us to hurt people. And I thought this was like a beautiful notion to realize. They talk about in the book how awful, they call it the wind of hate, that if you were close enough to see the enemy and feel like how awful it felt that someone was trying to kill you, that you just be like, why are they doing this? Like, why? It's like you could feel what they call the wind of hate. It's just an atrocious thing. It's such a failure of our common humanity, and it would just like scar people. And to me, this is a very beautiful book to realize, wow, that's really wonderful to know like the majority of people. It turns out that the guy who wrote the book is a fucking total psychopath who like thought it was a problem to solve, and he did it. They came up with all these methods of indoctrinating people. He teaches cops like these horrible warrior mindset fucking, like the guy who shot Philando Castile took, like these bulletproof cop things that basically teach him to shoot first and ask questions later. It's fucking terrible. Like that you have to be, and on top of it all, like the guy who's teaching everybody to like prepare yourself to kill mentally, you can do it, and all this horrible shit. Never killed anybody in his fucking life. In Line of Duty, never ever. It's like it's always these dead-eye fucking psychopaths who come. It's awful. Who tell other people to do it. But on that thing, I was thinking to myself, I was like, so we have this relationship to violence in this country where broadly speaking, half of people are like liberals and stuff, who it's just like they only are reinforced the narrative of nonviolent protests through MLK, which now I feel like is like a total fucking propaganda scheme. They don't talk about the Deacons for Defense and Justice, and they don't talk about how anti-capitalist he was. It's just like they don't talk about Malcolm X in the same like positive terms they talk about MLK at all, because of this like that any version of violence is bad and inappropriate. The same thing you see now when people see rioting or see like the burning of a police precinct, which is totally legitimate expression of protest and declaration of like, after this hundreds of years of systemic violence, which again, Terry, that's fucking really intense to think history, yes, has made the color of certain people's skins, they consent to violence automatically in the mind of the state. That liberals can't see that that's appropriate. That sometimes violence is appropriate as a political statement, as just like the correct motion to say like I deserve to survive and I deserve to thrive. And on the other side of it, why there are so many people who see a cop shoot somebody in the back or shoot somebody in the head who's like fucking handcuffed and not respond, or just lean on someone's neck and go, that's appropriate. That violence to them is an answer all the fucking time if it comes from authority. So how do you find this zone where you create a healthy relationship where people who are compassionate say, no, I'm allowed and people are allowed to use this to save their own goddamn lives and protect themselves and stand up for what is just. And the other side also starts to learn, like, hey, that's a fucking awful way to think the world works, that authority's always allowed to kill you.
Well, that's the problem. I mean, I would say, actually, I don't think it's the whole point is that it's not consent. And again, consent is an agreement between two equals, right? Equals in the sense that they have an equal access to power. Okay. So state violence and police violence doesn't involve any consent at all. We've simply passed laws justify the use of force and violence against groups of people because we just deem that to be okay. And you can trace the historical through line, But yeah, I mean, that's the issue, is that we've actually deprived the opportunity to withdraw consent from Black people, from poor Indigenous people, from people of color, from queer people, from trans people. We've said you don't get to be involved in the discussion of consent. You're just going to be a victim of state power. And people are so brainwashed that they think that makes it justified.
Well, also, of course, they're fucking brainwashed. That On Killing book talks about, like, the way they fucking fix the problem of human compassion is like operant conditioning. They would just change methods of, like, how they trained them so that when you saw a silhouette, you shot. And when you think about that, and you're like, I mean, I literally said, I used to say, I was like, when I was like a teenager going to do martial arts in the city with people from all these different backgrounds, prior to that, living in like these white affluent suburbs, I was like, the most exposure I had to people of color was fucking like cops. You know what I mean? Like, you're programmed. And then, like, until you meet fucking human beings,
A lot of people don't. I mean,
which they don't. So I'm like,
I don't
like,
mean
of course,
like saying hi to somebody in the office. I mean, like going over to somebody's house,
Yeah.
Anyway, I think the point is here that people say glorifying violence. I mean, I've never found a literary or like film example of glory that isn't inherently violent. So I think the idea of like
that's interesting.
Glorifying violence, I think the concept of glory, I mean, this is like from the Iliad, the concept of glory is inherently violent. I mean, it inherently refers to the kind of victory in battle or violence. So I don't think you would use the term glory to describe something that's nonviolent. So the concepts are inherently linked. Okay. Then the second piece of that is that, this idea of, violence being inherently glorified, particularly in our kind of Judeo-Christian Western-centric civilization and set of values and norms, that does poison people's minds. That has become a pathway to manhood, to strength, and we don't have alternative pathways that are based around consent and non-violent ways of maintaining social order. We just shouldn't be using, I think it violates our other values to use violence as a tool of maintaining maintaining social order in the sense of correcting minor deviations from the social order, selling cigarettes, walking across the street, having a broken taillight, which we all know is just an excuse for profiling. Using violence to correct those minor departures from our social order, and only for a certain group of people. People are like, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. No, it does make sense, because we have a culture that glorifies violence at the expense of the freedoms of certain groups. That's just our history. It's not that it doesn't make sense. Those cops are doing what they were trained to do. That is the philosophy of policing. It's not as if it's some aberrant, crazy thing. It's literally what they were trained to do, culturally inculcated to do.
I mean, fucking think about it. I mean, Terry, Terry's Indigenous and talks about that stuff like all the time. It's very important. It's like literally how we fucking programmed as children. Cops and robbers, cowboys and Indians. You know what I mean? Like, we're programmed. This, like, hundreds of years of state. That's the thing that keeps coming back to me about all this stuff: systemic oppression, racism, like crime, quote unquote, which Terry was talking about earlier. Which is, again, we talked about this last week. Is like, you guarantee capitalism guarantees unemployment, so you guarantee crime. Like, that's how the systems work. Realizing that these things are features, not bugs, of the way our world is set up. That it's not like the liberal idea that like no, we're gonna figure out. No, that's just we're working it out. Is like such bullshit. Like, these are things that are built into the system. That is how the system. Even that notion that you're just saying of glorifying violence is so interesting because, like, especially if you look back at like Iliad shit and stuff like that, is like there the idea of raw power is to be respected. That like it's weird to read old books and texts that like completely there's no like now a lot of like Western cinema and stuff like that has made it like action cinema has they put a veil of justice. Like, they need to give you a reason that it's okay for them to go do all this violence that you just get off on. But back in the day, not necessarily. It was just like, no, if somebody could destroy someone, if they could, like you said, impose their will, non-consent, that was like good. That was like they had, there was glory in that, you know, just like the power, the raw power was to be respected and admired. I don't know. So I think like getting back, this question that is a pickle to me is like how to create a healthy relationship that you are like, okay, that's another thing. I realized when I started doing martial arts and stuff like that, I'm very lucky that nobody in my family was ever physically abusive, like ever. So physical violence was, I thought to myself, this was like a double-edged sword when I started to do like more like combat sports and stuff. I felt all of a sudden, this is a weird comparison, but well, not really, because I always talk about like the sex and violence duality and the consent and that they're very similar. I was thinking like when you're a teenager, before you've ever kissed anybody, and like it feels so impossible to cross this physical divide. You're like, there's like a fucking force. Oh my God. And at some point, as you grow up and become more like you've done it, and now it's like, okay, kissing somebody is in your social lexicon. Like when it's appropriate, and you're like, go for it. You go for it. It doesn't feel like this no man's land that if you try to come out of the trenches, you're just getting machine gun. You know what I mean? Weird metaphor, but you know what I'm saying. Vice versa, I realized one day with after doing a lot of combat sports that an anxiety of physical contact had disappeared, where now violence felt like part of a social lexicon. And I was like, oh, one of the real awful tragedies and realities of putting violence in people's life, of like hitting a kid or something like that, isn't just that you've done them physical violence, or assaulting somebody. Isn't just that it's not the the short window of the pain that you've caused them. It's that you've taught them that's a part of the social lexicon. Is when somebody can't handle their feelings or can't communicate by another means, now they can do that. And that like they'll carry that forward and do it to other people as well. So I'm like thinking to myself, it makes sense that you'd have a response one way or the other. That you'd either go like, oh damn, someone victimized me, I'm going to be powerful now, and I will carry that ability to victimize in the future, and that's actually good and correct. And other people would have this abhorrent response where they say, that was horrible, I never want to do that to anybody. And like, how do you cultivate a thing where you're like, basically, how do I get it where like people who hate violence also know they're allowed to do it to protect other people and themselves, and people who think violence is really fucking cool get used to the idea that it's fucking horrible and like feel afraid of it and afraid of hurting people. How do we create this balance, this appropriate relationship in people?
I mean, I think it's really difficult. I mean, look,
Or sorry, last little thing, little anecdote. Or how do you fucking get people to understand the consent thing? Even like I was talking to a friend because I love jiu-jitsu, right? And I've been a big proponent that I think jiu-jitsu makes people better people. There's no way you can do it without it making you a better person. That's fucking wrong, because a lot of the people who like are big voices in jiu-jitsu are completely reactionary fascists. And I had one friend who, because I've been saying a lot, and I do think it's true, it's like the banning of chokeholds and stuff. It's like fucking stupid. It's like that has nothing to do with the systemic problems. They've been banned, and frankly, if you were not a racist or terrified or like violent person, a good blood choke is a really safe way to put somebody out, and just go like, okay, stop. You just don't keep fucking murdering them. Anyway, but like, I would think that would be correct. My friend was like, that's not correct. What like he does jiu-jitsu too, and was saying, told me the story about like when he was new white belt, and this like guy who was a cop he trained with had him in a Kimura and like didn't respect his tap as a white belt, and was like, people can't tap in the street, and it's like, it's like completely breaking the contract of what makes jiu-jitsu function. You know, and you're like, okay, so this guy's a fucking psycho. Like, how do you? So I'm like, clearly I'm wrong. You know, that like universally people will do this sport that humbles you, and it'll make you not be such a piece of shit. Do you know what I mean? Like, so where does it come from? Why are some people so fucking cruel? And like Terry said, the system isn't broken. It's working perfectly in the way it was designed. It's true. I don't know. I know this is like an impossible question, but it's like, that's where I'm stuck with, you know?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there have been violent psychos since there have been people, you know, and you're not going to prevent, just because it seems like, you know, there is like the nature and nurture process that kind of give rise to that behavior, you know. I just don't think it's productive to. And some people should do this, and I respect and I'm interested in their research agendas, but trying to understand the precise inputs and outputs that lead to psychopathy, like I'm not that interested in that. What I am interested in is making sure those people never get into positions of authority. And the problem is that we have systems that reward behavior. We have systems that reward narcissism, manipulation. That's why there's a disproportionate number of sociopaths running Fortune 500 companies and in politics, you know, because precisely those traits, narcissism, self-promotion, shallow charm, these are things that help people to get ahead. When we're going to have, if we're going to have professions allow people to violate the social contract and put their hands on other people without their consent, we just have to have incredibly rigorous systems in place that prevent psychopaths from getting into those jobs and that prevent psychopathic cultures from taking root. And the only way to do that is to have unremitting, unceasing what is the word? Transparency and inspection of those people at all times. They just can't be entitled to privacy ever.
Yeah.
All of their interactions have to be scrutinized.
Absolutely.
So, you know, it's an incredible privilege, incredible placement of trust in people, that most important thing in our social contract is that I'm free. I am free to pursue my goals as long as they don't hurt anybody else. I mean, that's the basic assumption.
Right.
That means that you don't ever get to touch me unless I am going to really hurt somebody else. Right. So if we're going to have people enforce that rule, they have to be scrutinized at all times. Mm-hmm. If there's even the smallest violation of the rules around that scrutiny, they need to be immediately gone. There can be zero room for error.
Zero.
And that's the reality.
I think the idea of what
we're just not there because people don't care about violating the consent rules around minorities. We just don't care about that.
Don't. You know, that's interesting. You know, I keep thinking about this thing this week, and that just came back into my head too. Is, you know, the Margaret Atwood thing that she said about you know, that the biggest fear a woman has of a man is that he will kill her, and the biggest fear a man has of a woman is that she will laugh at him.
Right.
I feel that metaphor carries through to like basically white people, like the notion of the Karen, you know, the ruling class that will use the arm of violence for anything. They you know, they see a black person birding and they don't like that they told them to put their dog on a leash, and so they will threaten their life with the or even to me when she is making that phone call and saying what she's saying into the phone, that is the same as flashing a gun at somebody. She is like brandishing a fucking gun at somebody, and it's almost more. It's worse than brandishing a gun at somebody, because not only are you implicitly, not only are you threatening someone's life and saying I could kill you, but you're saying like I don't even need to. I could get one of my servants to kill you. That my servants that I have set up in fucking society to do what that's. And this idea that there's like, it makes me very upset. I'm getting very emotional. That like the idea that we're living in this world where we have created a structure where one type of person is, I don't know, just has ensured this iniquity and this like willfulness that if I can't get a fucking haircut, I'm allowed to come threaten to murder cops. And they go, good point, sir. Good point. And that like, if we are actually murdering a kind of person, that those people, when they burn down a Target, were like, oh, these fucking, you know,
It's
scary
white,
and sucks to live in that world. It's a
white people's pride and comfort is more important than the lives of black people and people of color. That's what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was. Is how do you get people to differentiate what actual? Because you were saying this word freedom, right? Like that's a thing I thought about a lot. Like this epiphany that socialist thought is actually about freedom. Like this idea that it's been seized. You're guaranteeing, you're trying to create the freedom for people to express themselves however they want and have their actual lives and not be like under the thumb of like fucking bills to like decide what kind of human or dignity they're going to be. You know, like real freedom. How do you get people to like when you know cops have their authority threatened, they think their life is being threatened. You know, when they are threatened with discomfort or just or threatened with the idea of saying like, hey, just ignore other people living their own life doing what they want to do. That's not violence against you. You know, having a boundary, you having a like, I don't like people that are loud or different than me. You know, like that's not violence against you. I don't think white people understand that. Like, do you know what I mean? Like as a culture, as like the capital white people. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, which is why, you know, banning chokeholds is not the issue. It needs to be banning any physical contact at all for any reason other than imminent threat of death.
Yeah, that's fucking true. That's really true. That's actually
good. That's the only reason people should put their hands on other people ever. From a you know legal perspective.
Yep. But do you know what I'm saying? Like that question of like, how does that happen? That some people get the idea that a little bit of inconvenience and in their life is the same as being attacked.
They've been taught that through centuries of systemic racism. That's been taught that message, and it's been reinforced for them because it's been true. I mean, it's true in our culture. That's why people think that. They're right. Our culture.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. They're right.
To your point about like how much time to spend on this, I think it makes sense that people spend a lot of time like preparing for violence and accumulating the accoutrement of violence, you know, because it's such a like existential problem. Like
right.
It's like the only on-off switch in life, right? I mean, you know, if you fuck up that preparation, then that's it. Other preparation you can kind of skate by. So I think that's why it makes sense that people devote so much cognitive resource to it. The other piece is that, you know, it's more fun and a little bit easier than doing the other stuff, which actually comprises the bulk of our everyday lives and interactions. It's probably more important for us to spend time thinking about, okay, how do I have like hard conversations with people in my life? How do I like in my work promote an alternative agenda? You know, how do I, you know, skilled rhetorically so that I can have conversations with people with other views that just don't evolve into screaming matches. Like, how do we do all that stuff that really shifts culture? How do I do like the hard work of anti-racism myself? You know what I mean? How do you like lots of strategies that are, I think, more effective than like buying pallets of ammo, you know, but not as fun buying pallets of ammo.
Yeah.
But that, you know, I think that
is the hard thing. That is hard. It is hard to know like the not screaming match one is tough. How do I just not scream at people? How do you get people to not see it? And yeah.
Well, it's hard. I mean, there's some evidence to suggest that like a conservative political ideology, people who are very embrace their identity as conservatives, that they score higher on cognitive rigidity measures. So I think it is actually just more difficult for them to integrate new information. Now, that's true about extreme liberals too. I mean, anybody with an extreme ideology tends to be more rigid on the like cognitive rigidity measures. Was particularly true for people who identify as conservatives. You know, I mean, so, you know, it's challenging.
I think it's important maybe on some level too to like engage, like to examine in yourself if the notion of nonviolence is something you believe in truly because you don't like that you think it's a failure of communication and you feel like there's nothing more abhorrent than humans hurting each other, or if it's just because you're afraid of violent people. Do you know what I mean? Because I think, with at least in my experience with like liberals and stuff, I think a lot of it's more rooted in like, don't hurt, I'm sorry, you know, like
fear of victimization is not a coherent argument against violence. I mean,
and I
fear
want
of
people who have a
victimization.
fear of victimization to empower themselves. Terry said the phrase liberation from fear, and I agree with that. I wish for that for my friends who are good-hearted people and people out there who deserve justice and stuff, to deserve it, to like gird their spirit with that. But then I want fascists to fucking learn that other people feel pain and not like joy and fucking cruelty.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the issue is like, I forget who wrote this, but, you know, people always kind of caricature the argument that's traditionally been the right-wing argument for owning guns, which is like, well, the government has drones and bombs, you know? The idea isn't that,
yes,
the right-wing argument is not that they're going to literally, you know, have a ground war with the U.S. government. It's
right.
that people are less likely to resort to violence as a first resort if they know you are armed and prepared to resist. That's it. That's the argument. It's a deterrence argument.
It's
So
like that's what I was saying now. Personally, I think it's a political statement. Is like to have, it is just to have like a rifle or whatever. Just that you're never going to shoot. You're never. And I honestly think that's a thing people don't want to look at, but I kind of think the psychopaths protesting for two things. One, the psychopaths protesting for haircuts with rifles all over them obviously are part of the system to be protected by that. They're being protected by it. That the cops there who are like, yes, sir, I agree, sir, are like on their side. So there's that. But I also think. I also think
so
though,
funny to me.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, those people are in far more danger of dying from heart disease and diabetes than they are from Antifa. But 100%.
Like Antifa, hilarious. The other side of it, though, is part of me thinks like if protests were what they are now, I don't want to even say this, but I was going to say just nonviolent, peaceful expressions of this stuff, and they just happen to have like Deacons for Defense and Justice. So they just had groups of people around who are also armed as a political statement, not to have shooting matches with the cops. Obviously, that would be an incredible, atrocious failure. It'd be an atrocity. I mean, it'd be horrible. Nobody wants that. But I think it's a political, and I really think if it was like not just like a lone gunman psychopath. That's the other thing is, you know, somebody was, I think it was a Boogaloo guy, so those guys fucking suck, and it's like whatever. But one of those guys was like alone open carrying or something like that, and he got killed. Like, it can't be like one person showing up in march like that. It has to be something organized and disciplined with a group of people as an expression. And then it's a political thing that says, like, that oppression of systemically will have a cost. Like, coming in and trying to do this will have a cost. And it changes the calculations in someone's... It honestly is the same as in the microcosm of interpersonal violence. My first martial arts instructor said to me... So, like, a lot of the lessons of, like, rhetoric lessons and philosophy lessons of my first Kung Fu teacher, I feel like have really been true and stood through. And he was a scary guy. He had, like, really scary presence, I feel like. Yeah, I've never met somebody who had, like, such good, like, snake eyes. Like, such like, dead-eyed, like, when he turned it on, you're like, you're the scariest person I've ever seen. You know, sometimes a little bit of a bully, but, like, good lesson, you know? That one thing he said is, like, people don't like to fight people. They like to beat the shit out of people. And if they feel like they're going to get a fight out of you, they're a lot less likely to instigate that violence. And there's different ways they can get that message. Usually, I think it's not because you are puffing your chest up back. That's a sign of fear, and that's a sign of like two people accelerating each other and two fearful creatures getting themselves into a frenzy so that they can scuffle and not hurt each other for a few seconds, and people can pull them back. Or if one of them does, you know, do real violence because they're scared and hurts them really bad. Versus if you are just not rising to it, but it doesn't bother you. You're like, if that's a choice you want to make, that you want to fight, okay. You know, if you don't seem that it's just something in your lexicon that like kind of turns off. here's another thing I got from On Killing that was very profound and important for people to understand who abhor violence is one thing they talk about in the book is that when soldiers were more likely to shoot the enemy was almost always when they were retreating. That they had a lot easier time, humans had a lot easier time shooting people in the back. And that there's something in people where like we think that if we are small and pathetic and go, please, no, blah, blah, that'll make people see you as pathetic and go, oh my God, and see themselves and go, I'm going to stop being horrible. Unfortunately, it is true that on some horrible reptile level, that same thing with dogs. When dogs are scary and like if you run away from them, they'll chase you. There is something in predatory people. I mean, this is Jarrett. I'm not the psychologist here. Nick is the psychologist. So none of this is like, but this is just the thing I've encountered and was in this book is like, if you act pathetic and weak, predators pursue it harder. It empowers them to be more cruel and they continue being cruel. And I think there's some weird like deep survival instinct about it too. That's like a weird like herd kind of thing. That's like, this is a weak one. We have to kill this one. This one's like pathetic. We need to kill it. It's not going to be tough or something like that. And they just they pour it out and they're more cruel. Versus if you are not afraid and if you are like, no, you can fight me, but you're gonna get fucking hurt. It's gonna be bad for you, and it doesn't bother me if that's what you want to do. Is set something off that's like the predator goes, they're not responding how they're supposed to. They're not cowering. They're not like trying to get out of it. So there's something deflating and confusing. And I kind of think that there's something true about that on like a political scale as well.
I mean, people want easy targets. If you have a choice between an easy target and a hard target, no one's going to choose the hard target.
Yeah. I just want people who are like, I just want people to know that they're beautiful and perfect and they should be brave and the world think, you deserve. I'm fucking mad, dude. I hate this fucking situation.
I think it is hard to change. It's hard, it's very hard to change culture. Very, very hard. I think I actually, and of course the kind of like conservative shrieking is like, oh my God, they're canceling cops and took away Elmer Fudd's gun, which I do think is a little dumb. But canceling cops, I think that's good.
It's performative.
We don't need to see any more. We don't need to see any more like cop shows where the good cop crosses the line to get the bad guy. Like, we just don't need that narrative anymore. We don't need that narrative anymore. We need other narratives, and we just shouldn't be paying for that kind of entertainment.
Just look at the fucking when faced with all of the choices from pop culture symbology to choose, who's gonna represent? Is it Superman? Is it the person from an alien from another planet who has all the power in the world to do whatever the fuck he wants? Nothing will ever hurt him, and what he chooses to do is to protect people different from him. Do they choose the Superman symbol? Or do they pick the unhinged fucking war veteran whose whole family died, who thinks the only answer to anybody who disobeys authority is a bullet? They want the skull, baby. They want that fucking Punisher. That's who they think they are. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that's why these kind of like gestures at reform are just not going to be effective. We need to proceed from the assumption, in my view, that you can't touch anyone unless they're going to kill somebody.
I think that's a very good rule.
And if you mess up, if you shoot them because you think their cell phone was your phone, that's it. You're done. It's a one-time. Your judgment can't be trusted. If you make a mistake, if you make an error, sorry, that's it. Just like in another job that with much lower stakes consequences, like, oh, I think this can be a good stock trade. Oops, I lost $500 million. Well, you're fired, buddy. I mean,
well, that might not be a great example, but
pack your shit. I mean,
but you know what I mean? Those people also like get to fucking destroy the American economy and just keep doing it. So
yeah, they get hired at another department too. But that's the point. It's like, if you make the wrong call, you're done. It's one and done. That's it. And every decision has to be subject to public scrutiny. And if that sounds really hard and not fun, I get it. And it's not the job for you.
It's not the job for you.
Just don't need people out there putting their hands on people because they're like dumb and drunk or like rude or like playing their music too loud or
right.
Whatever.
Whatever the fuck you don't like.
People uncomfortable.
Learn what a boundary actually is. respect that other people exist. Unfucking real. Anyway, all right. Well, I don't think we got any like resolutions here today or anything. Obviously, I don't know that that'll ever happen. But thanks for letting us. Thanks for joining us, Terry. Especially, thank you for your contributions. Those were very good, very helpful. Always. I love you guys. I don't know. I'm worried about things. I guess I just stay like. I'm really into this idea of a warrior in a garden thing. Like, better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. Just be sure that you don't become obsessed with the warrior part and don't become too... And keep doing your regular life. My girlfriend was like, you're doing all this...
Warrior in a garden still needs to, like, plant the vegetables.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Or maybe, like, fold the laundry. Like, while I'm, like, Googling, I'm, like, all my prepping and stuff like that. I'm like, there's a lot of other... She's like, I appreciate it. This is what she said to me yesterday, which was actually really good. She was like, I love you. But she was like, I think we're spending 2 to 4 hours a day talking about, like, these things. And it's good. I'm glad we're, like, thinking about whatever. She's like, I feel like you are, like, constantly talking to me about this lifeboat you're putting together. You got to put this lifeboat together. And meanwhile, I'm like, I still have to drive the cruise ship. Like, I still have to drive the big ship right now. Thank you. It's good. It's not, but there's still the ship to drive. And I was like, yes. That is a good. You are smart and good. Thank you. Terry, that's good. Rest is resistance. You're right. We all have to. I just think this is just. I have been exposed to so many wonderful people because of the internet. The whole thing, the internet is like this cesspool. It is. It's full of horrible idiots. But I've also met so many like wonderful people from all different walks of life who feel like the system leaves them out. Whether it's because obviously you're BIPOC or something like that, but like, or just, maybe you're poor, or maybe you are neuroatypical, or like there's just something about you, queer stuff, obviously. Like, I've been all these people who like the system leaves them out, and they're just good people. They're like wonderful people, and I just want those people to be safe, and I want to like do everything we can to move towards a future where that flourishes, and I honestly think we'll get there as a species. I think we'll fucking get there. We will, but I don't know how many more bumps it's going to go through, and I think it's just tough. I was listening to some stuff about World War II stuff, and one thing they talked about like the insidious nature of fascism is that like in conflict, in war, that civil rights often go first. They like that civil rights don't survive conflict very well. And even if you watch that Las Sandinistas, this like wonderful documentary about them, they talk about like how basically they built a paradise. They had this like workers' revolution, and it was amazing. And then, the Contras get funded, and like all this atrocities start happening. And within the power structures, like things started to change. Women's like rights started to go away and stuff, and that like civil rights start to disappear under these horrible things. And that there's this insidious nature of like fascism on some level can be in fighting fascism. It wins automatically because you have to take on qualities of fascism to fight it back, to defeat it. Because they glorify violence, and they glorify hierarchy, and they glorify obeisance, and they that's things they believe in. And to stop that, sometimes you need to stop it as well, And so I just think maybe that's part of it, is in good-hearted people, there's a fear of becoming that horror, that like if you use the thing that was used to victimize you, like violence or something like that, to stand up for yourself, and that's what they do. That is the narrative. That is what they're trying to do right now. They say like, look at these violent people burning down fucking buildings, these looters. They're trying to do it. They project their insane cruelty and violence onto the world and use it as an excuse to do it more. I just think like, don't get tricked by that. And know that you and other people who are good people like deserve to be well and protected. And I think we'll get to a place. It's just that thing of the, again, warrior in a garden. It's like, how can we do the things that are abhorrent to us to protect people who need those protections, and to stand up for them, and to be and ourselves and be prepared for that, so you're not just steamrolled by this cruel, horrible system. And how do you have those conversations with other people who start to go, who say that, who are like these looters, whatever. My dad is a wonderful person, honestly. Like, I think he's a really good guy, very liberal, but like live a little bit. He's like in that sort of mindset. But like, he's friends with like all different kinds of people living on the south side of Chicago. Like, those are his friends. He's not racist at all, but race. He's not racist at all, but this isn't even about race. This is a class. This is like a socialism thing. He's getting the same news about the Chaz, right? The autonomous zone in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone. And it's kind of like, it's crazy out there, huh? And I'm like, it's not, I'm like, I don't know what the news is saying, but it's not. And it's like, people start to build these narratives where they try to say like Antifa and like, ooh, I think liberals sometimes be complicit in it because you start to go like anything that's disobedient to the state, anything that's not strict pacifism is bad. And I think it needs to be recognized that that is part of the control mechanism of a violent state, is to convince you that anything, it's like Catholic,
It's just shifting the narrative. Like,
Right.
America doesn't have a historical Chaz problem. It has a historical institutional racist violence problem.
Boom, that's fucking good. Boom, that's so good. That's a good answer.
It doesn't have a historical looting problem or a historical Antifa problem.
Yes,
it has a
that's so
historical racist system of violence and oppression problem.
Boom.
That's the problem.
Dr. Nick, that's a good response. That's fucking so good. That's the way to, because I was trying to, like, even my brother, he's like, not into it. He's like, I just think they're fucking up. He's like, they're doing this Burning Man thing, and it's like, it's so beside the point. It's just going to be used as an excuse to, like, da-da-da. And I was like, struggling to be like, they're not, it's an act of protest. It's a correct, but saying, that's a good way to put it, is like, it is an act, these are all acts of protest. There are not systemic problems of this. This is a statement that says what you think is systemically okay when you don't see precincts and targets burning down, and you don't see people occupying like government part of the and saying, hey, pay attention. That when you don't see that shit, that doesn't mean there's not fucking violence every fucking day being done to people to keep you from seeing that shit.
It's just totally irrelevant. I mean,
Totally irrelevant.
Seattle has better outcomes than, like, other than their horrible homeless problem, which is like non-trivial and terrible, and it's
Yes.
Seattle tax base supports, like, state of Mississippi, and their health outcomes are 10 times better. So yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Chaz. I just don't think it matters. Like, good for them, go ahead, fine. But it's not the issue, and people on the right want to make it the issue, but that's not the issue.
Yeah, it's not. When people are like, oh, see how, it's like the same thing when people say like, oh, you're socialist? Capitalism built that iPhone. You're tweeting about it. Why don't you go to a fucking island and start over from scratch with like sticks and stones and do a society like that? It's like, that's not the fucking, are you out of your mind? We're saying that workers already own the means of production. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's not that society, the notion that, do you know what I'm saying? It's disingenuous to say like, oh, Chaz is running out of water and power. Let's see how well their little fucking autonomous state does when we cut off the water and power. It's like, you fucking idiot. Don't be so, you know what I mean? See, this is my problem. I just scream at people. That's where I'm come to.
Yeah.
You are smarter than me, and that is the right way to do it. I think that's a really wonderful, if you can calmly say, well, there's not a systemic looting problem in this country. There's a systemic killing people who are minorities problem with state violence. And furthermore, when they say like they kill white people too, it's like also including the stats of like obviously it's so disproportionately not white people. You should also be like, doesn't that upset you? Why are you saying like we don't care when they fucking do it to some of the people that look like us? Why do they care? Besides getting into it's like just go like, why doesn't that fucking make you mad that somebody can just do that? Violence is not a thing that the state should be allowed to do to you fucking ever.
Oh, the problem is that when you give people enough room, the narrative that they come to is because they're racist. Come to the narrative that, well, they should stop committing so many crimes. That's what you hear from people. And the answer to that is that research shows clearly that white and black people commit crimes at the same rates. They use the same rates of drugs. You have the same rates 100%. Of all kinds of other crimes, the same rates. And it's just that one group of people is disproportionately policed, arrested, forced to accept plea bargains, and then imprisoned.
Yes.
That's the difference. White people smoke just as much weed. They do just as much coke. They do just as much meth. They beat their wives just as much. It's all... It's human behavior. It's pretty much the same rates. It's just one group of people is mercilessly policed. So, that's the answer.
Okay, that was good. Maybe that could be a theme of an upcoming episode is just like, because that's something I see a lot and I think is true. How hard it is to have these conversations, and maybe we'll like talk more about some of that. Is like
Yeah, we can. I mean, the bottom line is, it's good to open with the question: are you somebody who's able to change their view based on evidence?
That's
If you
good.
get something other than a yes, I don't think it's worth it.
That's a good point, because then I guess the subsequent follow up would be like, what would count as evidence to you? Like, what would make you? What are you not going to go like fake news? I think this thing that OAN or whatever fucking is true, you know?
That's the problem.
All right. Yeah, we are living in 1984. It's like, don't believe the evidence of your eyes and ears. You know? War is peace. Okay, well, love you guys. Love you, Dr. Nick. Thank you so much. That was really good. I'm glad we stuck around a little longer than usual. That last thing you said about we don't have a Chad's problem, we don't have a rioting problem in this country, we have a police violence problem, is like fucking primo shit. I love that. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. You can support the pod at mygooddadbrain.com. Get shirts and shit. You can also go to Patreon if you want to support Jarett Enterprises. Patreon.com/mygooddadbrain. But you can also just be donating that money to a million different Black Lives Matter causes that are out there, or like the Okra Project, or just like, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things you should be giving money to. So do that. Okay, that's it. Take care of yourself. Self-care and hydrate. Be well. Terry said here, yes, rest is resistance as well. Please take care of yourselves and just get fucking strong. Get ready. Stand up for yourself. Protect your